Well, hello. We are back in here this week. Hey, Amanda.
Hey,
Nice to
Melissa.
see you back in here. You're a returning guest. You were just here earlier in the year, and we talked about lots of different things. And I wanted to
Yes.
bring you on back because we have something in common. We both wear Omnipod 5. And new for me, well, somewhat new for you because I know it's a new design pump anyway for this, for the company, but definitely brand new for me. And I've been kind of going through the settings, gotten a lot of help from you and a lot of people in the community. Pumps in general are a hot topic because everybody has an opinion,
Yes.
generally speaking, right?
Yes.
Based on experience, what they've heard, what they know. So I thought it would be a great thing to just kind of dive into, and the fact that we both use it, we have our own personal experiences about it. So tell me, have you? Because I know you've been on other pumps. This is not your first pump.
Right.
Yeah,
I
just,
was,
just kind of tell me your pump history.
yeah, sure. So I was on Omnipod a long time ago. I don't even remember what they would have called that. Maybe Dash. I don't
Okay,
remember, but it was
I've
a
heard of
long
that.
time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was also on the Animus Vibe for a
Okay.
while, and then now I'm on Omnipod 5, but before Omnipod 5 I was on the Tandem T Slim.
Okay.
And I've been on Omnipod 5 maybe almost 2 years now. I'd say between a year and a half and 2 years. I
Okay.
can't quite remember. Almost 2 years.
Okay. And was it because it's tubeless? Is that what kind of drew you in? Because
So
that's what,
my yeah,
yeah,
my
that was my
that was
criteria. Yeah.
that was what drew you into it
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So my endocrinologist suggested it to me. I wasn't unhappy with the T Slim, but I think with the Omnipod 5, having the algorithm and auto mode and kind of being a different kind of pump therapy and coupled with the tubeless feature, my endocrinologist thought it might be something I would enjoy both comfort level and just being able to possibly have better control with
Hmm.
the newer technology. So gave it a go.
Okay. Something, the first word, when I think about, when I dove in, it was mid-October, so it's 4 months now. Yeah, it's just about 4 months today almost. I think it was the 17th, 18th that I jumped on it in October. And the one term I keep hearing, and I didn't hear it as much when I first started because I don't think my ears were really in tune with all these terms at that point, was algorithm, that it's different. And I didn't even know, again, being new to a pump, I've been surrounded by them, but being on one and just having it, having clients and friends, and back in the day when my husband was actually on, um, let's see, he was on Medtronic, so that was over 10 years ago. So I'm familiar, but not really, because you don't really know anything until you're on the system and how it really adapts to you, or how you adapt to it. So, but the term algorithm, and it's funny because I looked at the description, and I'm going to read this because this
Okay.
is how they describe it, and this is probably not going to be news to you, but the Omnipod 5 algorithm, it's called the Smart Adjust. So it's the technology. It stands out by proactively adjusting insulin delivery every 5 minutes based on predicted future glucose using CGM data to anticipate where your blood sugar will be in the next 60 minutes, in the next hour, rather than just reacting to current glucose readings. So that is a big difference compared to, so like if you were to compare it, say your experience being on the Tandem or maybe the other models of Omnipod, does this all kind of, okay, obviously it makes sense. It just kind of ties together with how they describe their own product. Um, and one more thing, it says it increases, decreases, or pauses. Yes, I'm familiar with the pause. That's something I'm learning. The insulin delivery accordingly without requiring separate correction boluses for high blood sugar, and adapts to individual needs. It's a lot of stuff. By learning from your total daily usage with each new pod change. That's what I learned as well. And
Yes.
it was like, well, just give it time. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to do that. Because my uh, basically my thinking and the way that I've always kind of approached things is once I decide on something and I invest in it and I commit to it, I'm not, generally speaking, want somebody that's just going to jump off and say, no, this is not working. This is not for me. I really wanted to see it through. And I'm really glad that I've stuck with it, because I've had some times where I was like, oh my gosh, I just want my insulin pen back, because that was something that I knew. But all the descriptions that I just kind of read off, it really does. And I only wished I had known that maybe sooner, because I didn't really understand when everybody's talked about algorithm, really what that meant and how it was different in comparison to other pumps.
I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people, when they initially get on Omnipod 5, decide to bail on it and go back to prior pump therapy or back to MDI. And I will raise my hand and say that I was one of those people in that mindset initially, but it's because I didn't understand that Omnipod 5, because of that algorithm, it's different than other pump therapy. And to the point of what you just said and what you read, the algorithm is learning us as individuals based on the total daily insulin that we are giving ourselves. And then with every pod change, it kind of dumps that data back into the algorithm. So the first thing that I learned was that I had to change my insulin to carb ratios and make them much stronger, meaning needing more insulin per carb than what I had as a insulin to carb ratio in my prior pump.
Yeah.
And so in order to get that algorithm to really function and to optimize, you have to feed the algorithm by bolusing and correcting early and correcting often, so that it can, again, learn you and learn what your needs are. So that's the biggest, I think, difference in Omnipod versus other pump therapy, is that there's no basal schedule. So it is only based on what you're bolusing and when you're correcting, and then learning from you based on the insulin you're delivering, the bolus that you're giving. It doesn't have a set schedule. It does have a manual mode where you can set a basal schedule. But if you use manual mode with Omnipod, it doesn't take into account any of your CGM readings. So it's even less advanced than a pump like Tandem that has a basal schedule, but has that, I think they call it control IQ. So like a closed loop situation where it is making adjustments based on your CGM. So in order to get the full benefit of that closed system in Omnipod, you want to be in auto mode.
Yes. And I remember it is. And it kind of reminds me of like when you're meeting somebody for the first time, it's that introduction. It's like, you've got to give it time. You can't expect to know everything at the beginning. You really got to get a chance for just like they say, the system's got to get to know you, and you've got to get to know the system.
Right.
Now, in my trip, my journey through this has been, again, we started off with settings, because you got to start somewhere. And the hardest part for me was that basal thing. It was like, I can't have more control over this basal, or lean on it more, because I was always so dependent on my basal on multiple daily injections. Not dependent on it, but I really leaned on it. I trusted in it. I knew that was really going to hold me steady, and the rest was bolus. Generally speaking, we always have those days that things don't always add up, but I like that consistency of it. And since then, I have continued to make adjustments. Just 3 weeks ago, I went to the doctor, and she herself, the endo, we sat and we did some adjustments right there, because she agreed too, because my A1C, and this is kind of the hard part, my A1C prior to starting on the pump, I used to average about 5.7, 5.8. And this visit that I just went to her, it was 6.4. That's a pretty good jump. And it's like, gosh, I didn't think. But understandably, she even said, the doctor is really appreciative of her, her honest feedback and encouragement, that, again, it's just part of that learning curve. Again, give it time. And I'm already starting to notice that it's, again, with the setting changes, with the patience, with the time, that it's tightening up. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think with anything, and to your
Yeah.
point, we just have to allow time for the adaptability, the learning curve. And with Omnipod, it really was kind of about adjusting or rewiring my thinking
Mm-hmm.
about how this pump works. I will be honest and say, just the last handful of years, I have really taken a deeper dive into my own T1D management. So even though I was on a tandem pump before, I couldn't tell you how detailed the pump was working or how often I spent analyzing data. I didn't. I didn't even
Mm-hmm.
understand how to do any of this. So
Mm-hmm.
it's fair to say that the Omnipod has helped support my improved A1C and overall T1D management. But I'm not going to give the Omnipod all the credit. I'm going to give most of the credit to me because it was
Mm-hmm.
my effort. Because who's to say that if I switched pods that I couldn't, again, with a new learning curve, once I got over that initial hurdle of a new
Mm-hmm.
pump,
Mm-hmm.
that I couldn't maintain the same type of management. I think that we have to find the technology that's right for us. And I think the technology is there to support us. And if we take the time to learn how to optimize it as best we can so that it supports us, support being the primary word here, it's here to support us. It's not here to run the show. Like, we're still the
Sure.
driver.
It's
We are
true.
still in control. It's still our responsibility to understand that pump, understand that technology, and again, optimize it to the best of its potential. Because it's not the answer to everything, but I
Mm.
think if we take the time to try to learn it, then that's our best chance at getting it to support us in the best way it can.
Yeah, yeah, really good point. And I think about a lot of people that are switching or trying new systems. For me, it was a little more dramatic because I went from never being on a pump to suddenly being on a pump. But I wonder, in your opinion, I mean, for me, 4 months to get where I was, because you were kind of alongside there, as a friend and somebody who I was talking with and familiar with during that journey. It's funny how you go back and you say, was 4 months too long to learn it? Should I have maybe, again, we can't change what we didn't do as far as corrections or adjustments or maybe spending more time really studying the system a little bit better. I wonder if maybe I could have cut that frustration in half if I'd been a little bit more, I guess aggressive's a word, but a little bit more willing to make those adjustments. The correction factor. The two things I think of is the correction factor and the insulin to carb ratio, which
Mm.
are things that I can't believe what my settings are right now. Because in point, because I know you've said the same thing. It's like wow, but it's really what the system not needs in order to keep me where I want to be, which is a little tighter than right. So just understanding that.
Yeah, I think there would be a lot of people that would be blown away if they heard what my morning insulin to carb ratio is, and I don't mind sharing it. Right now,
Sure. Yeah. If you're
it's
comfortable.
usually like 1 to 4.5 to 1 to
Mm-hmm.
5,
Okay.
which I think when I've shared that with other people before, they're like, "Oh my gosh, that is so much insulin." And there are times in the morning when I look down at my pump and I have like 10 or 11 units on board,
Mm-hmm.
but it's working for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that, again, rewiring our thinking is related to conquering that fear of insulin. Oh, I need more insulin. I must be a bad diabetic. Something must
Right.
be
Right.
wrong. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we need what we need. That's
That's right.
just the
That's right.
breaks. So, and
That's
if we
right.
didn't have type 1 diabetes, we would have no idea what our body was giving us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to stop worrying about that number and focus on the number that we need that supports us and not what that number could mean in a negative connotation. Because again, it is what it is. And as my day progresses, my insulin to carb ratio drastically changes. It's almost cut in half by dinner time.
Oh,
So like right
okay.
now in the morning, it's 1 to 5, but at dinner, it's 1 to 9.
Okay.
So that's how
Mm-hmm.
much my
Mm-hmm.
insulin sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
increases throughout the
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm.
But again, in at the beginning of Omnipod, I had that morning breakfast insulin to carb ratio set at 1 to 10. And I mean, I was just high for hours and hours and
Mm-hmm.
hours. And I was so mentally resistant to make that change because again, I was thinking, what am I doing wrong? Why is this pump failing me? The pump wasn't failing me, it just wasn't optimized. And
Yeah.
again, it's
Yeah.
because I had to feed that algorithm with the right amount of insulin so that pump could better support me.
Mm-hmm.
So that took some time. And I've been on, like I said, Omnipod 5 for almost 2 years, and I'm still making tweaks and I'm still learning. And in the last month, I've learned a lot about this pump, a lot of surprising things that I'm honestly on the fence about, which we can totally talk about here if you want.
Yes,
But I
definitely.
think I think 4 months is not I don't think you should be disappointed or discouraged about that timeline.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to just kind of lean into things as you want. And you also have to take things in baby steps. And you know this too, with your own
Yeah.
coaching as well to your clients
Mm-hmm.
and just your own approach. Things are a domino effect. So we don't want to change all of our settings at one time because
Mm-hmm.
then it's hard to identify in a concentrated section of our day what is really impacting us. So
Right.
it could take you a week or two to sort out just your morning insulin to carb ratio, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of check and then move
There
on
you
to the
go.
next thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you're open to making those
Yeah.
adjustments and leaning into it, uh, failing is not a bad word.
No, no, nope, no. It's just another step to gain more information for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about. We'll start off if you want to share your pros. So what are you loving about it,
Cool.
and what have you learned about it? And you just mentioned that there's some things that you're within recent adjustments, and I'm going to throw some things in here too that you're aware of that I'm doing.
Sure.
Or that I've tried. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
you just mentioned something, and I don't want to forget to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the two settings that you were kind of focused on was your insulin to carb ratio
Yeah.
and your sensitivity factor, also known as the correction factor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this has actually been a hot discussion for me lately with my T1D coach, with my endocrinologist, and then a couple of other medical professionals just
Mm.
in the social media space that I chat with. And also, I had a conversation with a diabetes educator at Omnipod because
Oh,
I was getting a lot of mixed messages about what was
interesting.
happening with the pump.
Okay.
So, what I have learned and confirmed, I think, straight from Omnipod's mouth, is that the the insulin sensitivity factor, or the correction, we'll call it correction factors, that's what
Yeah.
it's called in the pump.
Mm-hmm.
The pump does not take into account what your correction factor is when it's making decisions for you. The only
Mm.
time the pump utilizes that correction factor setting is when you are giving yourself a correction. So you open you open the app,
Yep.
you press the little vial, and you plug in your glucose, and then it'll determine based on your insulin on board and what your current BG is
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
it wants to offer a correction. And that correction is calculated based on the correction factor setting you have
Mm-hmm.
input. But when you look in your history and see all the little micro doses that Omnipod's giving you, those apparently have nothing to do with your correction factor setting,
Hmm.
which I find kind of interesting because it makes me think, well, if I have this setting and I'm telling Omnipod that 1 unit of insulin corrects me 30 points,
Mm-hmm.
then why wouldn't it take that into account when it's correcting me to help prevent me from having a low? And
Yeah.
that is one of my biggest struggles is overnight lows with Omnipod.
Okay.
So that's my biggest struggle. Daytime, for the most part, things are going really, really well for me, but the overnight has been challenging. I don't know if you knew that about the correction factor or not.
No, no. I'm still learning all this. Yes. Yeah. That's really information. That's really so the minimal, and I'm looking at my pump here.
Yeah,
I'm still looking at it's what's called. Can you go to history detail? I love that tab actually.
me
That's
too.
yeah, I love seeing that. And it's what's called the auto events,
Yes,
which is the basal. It's what's considered a drip.
yes,
It's okay. It's based on your settings. So this is the what confused me. This was what really I was back and forth with my pump trainer because I did not understand. It's like, why am I setting a basal rate if it doesn't matter in the automated mode?
right.
But she's like, oh, but it does. So I was like, well, I still don't understand. So, but obviously that's what's related to these auto events that's happening. So and this is my big thing. It's like, because I want it to make sense. I'm like, so if I'm trending high a couple hours after a meal and I obviously didn't bolus for it, why wouldn't the auto events kick in and help cover me for that? Again, if we have set that goal level, which on my system it's the 110.
Same.
And so it contradicts what, and I'm not trying to argue the system. I'm just really trying to understand
Sure.
what can I get from the system in order, to not feel frustrated with, how it's operating, or what more can I do to make it work better. So that's, so yeah, I mean, the correction factor almost sounds like, to me, when I think of correction factor making one, it's because I didn't calculate prior. So I'm correcting what didn't happen right the first time.
Right. And you would have to do that manually. You would go in and decide to make a correction. And correcting often or correcting early does help feed that algorithm. But to your point in that auto events section where you can see the little micro doses, those amounts, to my understanding, are not related to your correction factor setting. Those are just OmniPod's reaction to what's currently happening, and then where it foresees you being in the future, next 60 to 90 minutes.
That's right.
And also based on how much total daily insulin Melissa or Amanda currently receives. So like, for example, right now I actually had a pump failure right before we started this podcast. So
oh, no.
That's okay. I changed my pod. I gave myself a little bit of a manual injection to try, because it's hard to tell how much insulin we really got or not. But when I look in my auto events, I can see that my pump is, it's actively every 5 minutes. I can see that it's giving me microdoses, trying to help, bring me back down. And when I go into that file button and click that use sensor, it's actually not offering me a correction amount because it's still considering the insulin I have on board and my current correction factor setting. But in the background, it is kind of working, and it's going in smaller doses because it's conservative. It's a more conservative pump. So we're not going to see it in there as aggressively correcting as we might on our own, or rage bolus.
Right.
My quote fingers over here. As sometimes we do. I really try not to do that. I prefer the conservative nature of OmniPod's auto correction, because I would rather be high and come down in 3 to 4 hours and avoid the crash than rage bolus or have a really aggressive correction and then bottom out, in 90 minutes to 2 hours. So I think that's probably a personal preference, but for me, I'd rather just kind of like continue on and know that the pump is going to bring me back down, and also kind of stick the landing, if you will, and not have me drop low.
Gotcha. Okay. So what did you learn when you got with the experts and the OmniPod diabetes educator about this correction factor, just trying to get it more understood? Did it change how you're doing your own therapy right now?
Well, reason this sparked, that's a great question. The reason this sparked such a multiple conversations amongst people in my life was because when I saw my endocrinologist, the first thing he said was, your days for the most part are beautiful. Your time in range is amazing. My A1C has been consistently under a 6 for the last year. But my biggest problem, as I mentioned before, is overnight lows. And so my endo said, why don't we change your correction factor from, and I will share my numbers. I don't care.
Sure.
It was 1 to 50. Okay. And he said, what if we change it to 1 to 65 or 1 to 75? Because his line of thinking was, if we signal to OmniPod that, hey, 1 unit of insulin brings Amanda low or drops her 65 points, it will back off on any of the microdosing it's doing overnight.
Okay.
And in my mind, that sounded brilliant. well, sure, it's just another setting to let the pump know I'm super sensitive overnight. So be really careful about what you're giving me. Be extra
Okay.
conservative, Omnipod,
Mm-hmm.
about what you're giving me.
Mm-hmm.
But based on what I remembered reading and conversations with my T1D coach, was that this wasn't going to work. So we changed the setting just for the heck of it, because why not? I'm asleep. So it's not like I'm waking up in the middle of the night typically and giving myself a correction.
All right.
And it didn't help. But I
Okay.
went back and had a conversation with both my coach and also Omnipod, and they both confirmed that that setting does not impact Omnipod's decision in giving you the microdose. So I sent my
Okay.
endo a note and said, I hate to ruin our line of thinking, but just
Yeah.
confirming that that actually doesn't matter. That change would only impact Omnipod indirectly, meaning with if I was making that correction by myself.
Okay, so that would help in a manual action of doing the
Correct.
correction, but not something. So yeah, so those are just two different. Yeah, so we're talking apples and oranges, really, with
Right.
really how the system is working. Okay, okay. And I'm assuming that you changed that correction factor for like an overnight setting. Is that
Yes.
how? Okay, that makes sense. Obviously, your
Yes.
bedtime hour. Okay. Huh. Well, let's talk about something else that I did, and I'm
Okay.
going to throw
Yeah.
this into the mix because I was given advice, probably it was around Christmas time, and I spoke to a different pump trainer. She's actually been on the show here a few times, Stormy Baxter, and she lives with type 1 as herself. And we just got on the phone one day because she heard online that I was kind of sharing where I was with my Omnipod adjustments, and she said, "Yeah, let's talk about this." So we did, and she gave me some. She too agreed that I needed to tighten up those settings a little bit. Just kind of dial in insulin to carb ratio and the correction factor. But she said a lot of endos are starting to recommend Fiasp insulin, which is a
Mm.
faster acting insulin. And she said, you can definitely talk to your doctor about it. Some doctors have different opinions because I guess it wasn't one of the tested insulins that Omnipod did with the system. So they can't, recommend it, I guess. That's definitely something that maybe has to be something that has to be talked about with you and your doctor. And I don't generally think twice. I'll be like, okay. And I did message my doctor. She gave me the prescription. Within a couple days I had it. She's like, yeah, this is fine. She trusted that I knew what I was doing enough to go for it. And I'll tell you, it did make a difference. And I'm
Okay.
so glad I made that switch. So the theory is that, again, I think this all goes back to the basal because there's less background insulin there to kind of help guide your numbers or to keep you steady, whether we're talking day or night. And what this was doing was, and I think it was another way for the system to say, not only were my settings having to be changed, but this insulin it was catching my insulin sooner than later. So it was working faster, getting in faster, because timing is everything when it comes to eating, bolusing, all of
Absolutely, it
that, and then
is.
you got to factor in all the other things like exercise and time of day, hormones. So I was really happy to do that, and it has made a big difference.
So you do feel like you're seeing a difference in the way your body
Yes.
is responding primarily to food, I would guess, with the
Mm-hmm.
Fiasp.
Yeah.
Are you having
Yeah.
any burning at your insertion site with the pod?
No, no.
Okay.
I've heard that before though. Some people do have some reactions to that, but no, knock on my table here. No, 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 no ill effects at all. And I think the one thing I am noticing, I think dinner time tends to be the one where I'm a little more sensitive, just based on the time of day. It's usually after a workout, that time of day. Um, I've got to be careful with what I'm really dosing for because I'm noticing just this week that within an hour after eating, and it's not a whole lot of dose. It's probably 1.5 to 2 units. It's not a lot of insulin for this meal, but within an hour, I'm starting to head south. I mean,
Mm.
it's going down quick. So I continue to learn. And I don't know if that's a combination of obviously my settings, a big part of this is like you say is, we still have to put the information in, Omnipod 5 obviously knows us very well. It's starting to know us and our habits and our nature and our tendencies, all those things to help make those decisions or help guide our decisions based on what it's suggesting. But like, for instance, if I'm having a meal that could be 30 grams of carbs or is 30 grams of carbs, I'm going to key in 25. Just based on the fact that I know, and again, as we all know, it all depends on what we're starting at with our blood sugar, because that's another whole thing. Generally, I'm at a pretty good number, around 100-ish before eating, but 25 is, even sometimes that's a little too much. So, but that has something to do with not only my insulin carb ratio, insulin getting on board faster. And, we don't want that. We want it to just kind of hang level as, balances, the best we can, we don't want any sort of roller coaster, especially after eating. So it's just some things I continue to learn for sure.
Absolutely. So I personally haven't tried Fiasp. I think I have a vial of it in the refrigerator where I keep my insulin because my endo gave me a vial.
Okay.
He was really kind of like, give it a try if you want. Okay. But he felt like what he had heard from most of his patients was that they couldn't tell that significant of a difference.
Interesting.
I've heard some folks talk about it on, their own social experiences that they've been sharing, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Some people have burning at the insertion site. Some people felt like they had leakier sites. Some people didn't experience either of those, and they felt like they could absolutely tell a difference. And some people said, I didn't notice a difference at all. So it's so interesting how it's, marketed as a faster acting insulin, but some people don't see that. And it sounds like you are.
Yeah, I do.
And your pump, if this is a newer thing you've been doing, the Omnipod, is kind of started building that algorithm for you specifically. So I wonder if it's not quite caught up that maybe you need less insulin, right? So
that's another part of it. Absolutely.
And the other thing I look at too is that when I bolus, because I can resonate with what you're saying about how much carbs is this, but like what are some other outside factors? So one of the things I look at is the pausing, like how long has Omnipod been paused? Because if there hasn't been any pausing, even if I'm going into a meal and I'm starting to trend kind of low, if the pausing hasn't been for very long, I'm going to give that full bolus. But if I'm going into a meal and I've been paused for like an hour or hour and a half, I'm probably even going to give a little bit more. I may not give 30 grams. I may give 35 grams because my insulin's been paused. So I feel like that food's going to hit me a little bit harder. So I need a little bit more of that insulin to support me. But again, there's no basal schedule. So we're kind of having to think about how to add in that extra insulin.
Yeah.
It's just a completely different way of thinking when you are algorithm based, not basal schedule included.
Absolutely. And I think what's helped with me with the Fiasp is the fact that my body's, all of our bodies used to have insulin on board for many reasons, not just food, but just to give it that little extra, I think has really helped. And having that timing, because I felt like I was chasing my sugars. Well, I was chasing it. It's like, when I was sticking at 150 for hours, and it's like, what do you mean? It's like the basal setting was not helping me. And I was obviously calculating. And then it's all of it. It all added up now that I look back. We can look back and say, now I get it. It's hard when you're in it. It's hard and it's frustrating. I think one of the things that really tricked me up too, and I don't know, because I know with you said you're more sensitive overnight. I tend to start out really good at bedtime and early in the morning. And I really think this might be cortisol, is even though I think, there's a lot of things that are more level with my life now than it was, say, maybe 5 years ago hormonally. But I'm still seeing that. And it's like, well, why doesn't this pump catch that at 5:30 in the morning? Because I'm up at 6:30. Why am I waking up? Because you can see the trend graph. It's like, man, I hummed at like 105 overnight. It was wonderful. And then you put feet on the floor as we know it. And then suddenly, and that's okay. That's something else I've had to get used to doing. And I was doing that with the MDI as well, is this is just a different stage. This is what my body needs right now. It's okay to take 2 units when your feet hits the floor. Get a jump start on it. Get some, just to kind of help the system out.
I do that.
Yeah.
I
I've
have
heard you say that.
yeah, I do a foot to floor bolus. Absolutely.
Yep. I love that. Fit to floor bolus. It's just interesting. But that was part of my frustration was this pump is not catching it. Why is it not there to, because obviously you're sleeping. But it's interesting because you're having the opposite effect because yours is, kind of pushing you lower,
Right. I usually bottom, like if
just
I'm
based.
going to have a low, it's going to be usually between like 2 and 3:30 in the morning. But I do have that impact of that early morning cortisol as well. So some nights when I'm going low, I actually won't necessarily wake up unless my alarm is going off. It's not uncommon for me to dip down around like 2:30 in the morning to like 70, 65. And then around that 3:30 hour, that cortisol hour, I start to naturally come back up. But there have been plenty of nights where I'm waking up with, all the alarms going off. I'm at 50. So that's been my biggest struggle is how can I prevent that from happening?
Yeah, I get it. So if they were to have some improvements on this product, or maybe, if there was a dream pump, what would be something that you would like to see added in? Any sort of changes?
I wish there was a sleep mode. So there is activity mode.
Yeah.
on the auto mode side of things. So that is traditionally what I use when I go to sleep is I put myself in activity mode. And that gives you that initial just total pause of insulin, and it also sets your target BG up to 140 so that the pump is not, giving you those microdoses in the background to help you ideally get back to around that 110 target range. Now it's 140. And you can also, instead of going on activity mode, and I've played with this too, just change your target overall. So you can make your target go up to 150. I don't remember. I think I'd have to look at the highest. I think the highest target is 150 that you can choose. So I've played with that, but there is a difference in how OmniPod thinks about the strategy of how it's going to bolus you, or not bolus you, but microdose you, if you're in activity mode versus a higher target. So I've also tried, coupling them too, combining them. Because like I said, this is my biggest struggle. So I don't know, like if I could design the specifications, what that would look like. But I do wonder if there was a sleep mode that could be used overnight where basically it's like, don't give me any insulin. Because that's what I need is I basically need no insulin overnight. And the reason I know that is one, I can look back in that auto history tab that we were talking about earlier. But another interesting thing that OmniPod does in auto mode is if you are in auto mode and it pauses your insulin delivery for a long period of time, it will throw you into manual mode.
I was just going to ask you about manual mode as part of the caveats. Okay.
Yes. So this happened to me last night. So at 10 p.m., I put myself on activity mode last night, and I think I set activity mode for like 4 or 5 hours. And at 4 o'clock, and I can look in the history, and I received no insulin from the pump from like 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. And 4 a.m. is when the pump automatically kicked me into manual mode. And so I was asleep. So when I woke up, I was in range, which is excellent, and happy to be in range. I immediately put myself back in auto mode, gave myself my foot to floor bolus, got up. But that required me, when this started happening to me, I had to go into manual mode and figure out what I wanted my early morning basal schedule to be, so that if OmniPod kicked me into manual mode while I was asleep, I wouldn't wake up at 200.
Right.
So I'm having to rely on both sides of this system, but not necessarily by choice. It's just
Mm-hmm.
a feature of the pump. So this is a long answer to your question. I'm sorry, but
No,
I'm kind
no,
of
it's all
thinking
good.
out loud,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
this is,
yeah. I'm picturing
another
all this too. Mm-hmm.
interesting things about this pump
Mm-hmm.
is I wish there was a setting in auto mode that you could say, hey, it's sleepy time, it's nighttime for me, and I don't want any insulin delivery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Unless my blood sugar gets to be 160 or 180 or whatever aggressive number, or I guess it'd be more conservative number that you want to give it.
Yeah.
Because what's been explained to me is that, because I asked, okay, it's 11 o'clock at night. I know from experience that I don't need any insulin overnight. And even the smallest amount of microdosing is going to make me crash. So it's 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. and my blood sugar is 90. Why is Omnipod microdosing me?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm actually below target
Mm-hmm.
at 90. The algorithm, in my opinion, should have picked up by now that I don't need insulin overnight and that
Mm-hmm.
I also crash overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So that insulin that's given to me 9, 10, 11 o'clock is impacting me 2, 3, 4 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
my coach, my endo, myself, we've been trying to figure out how to optimize or
Yeah.
manipulate the settings in this pump to help prevent that.
Mm.
And it's not been super successful. So that's the most frustrating thing for me about Omnipod. Other than that, I really love this pump. But
Mm-hmm.
it's I recently tallied up the last like 79 nights, and only 31% of my nights were without an issue overnight.
Mm. Mm.
That's too many
That's
problems.
too many.
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 That's too much. That's too much variable there.
right.
Hmm. Okay. Well,
I know that's a
I
lot. And
know.
I
It's
also
interesting.
I
Yeah.
understand that, again, the Omnipod is not necessarily built or designed like for someone as specific as me. So it might be time to consider other versions of pump technology or pump therapy that
Gotcha.
might
Yeah.
have a sleep mode or some other variables with basal schedules that I can kind of stack to help
Mm-hmm.
protect
Yeah.
me and get me what I need.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to a few more things, trying to give it a little bit more time to make sure we've exhausted all of our resources.
Okay.
But it's that, yeah, like I said, that's my biggest frustration. I've also been trying sleeping in manual mode, just
Mm.
going into, because in Omnipod in manual mode, you can set a basal rate of 0,
Oh,
which is
okay.
which is
Okay. That's
awesome.
helpful. Okay.
Yes. So for me, I don't need any insulin
Yep.
overnight on most nights. So when I go to bed, let's put myself in manual mode, have a
Mm-hmm.
0 schedule until
Mm-hmm.
2:30 a.m., 3 a.m., because we know good old cortisol is going to knock on our door, right?
Sure. It sure does. It sure
um,
does. Uh-huh.
but what I have learned over the last 3 weeks of trying that is that I am now running higher all the time.
Mm.
And I really got to thinking about this, Melissa, because I was like, okay, my daytimes for the most part are really good. So
Mm.
why did my average BG go from 120, 125 to 140,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
150?
Mm-hmm.
And after doing a lot of reading, again, talking to Omnipod, because that out, and this is bringing us full circle to the first thing you read,
Mm-hmm.
that the auto mode is based on that algorithm. Well, when we put ourselves in manual mode, or I put myself in manual mode for 8 hours, I'm breaking the algorithm in
Mm.
essence. So when I kick myself back into auto mode in the morning, the pump is having to readapt that
Mm.
algorithm. So it's
Makes sense.
missing data,
Yeah.
and it's used to my total daily insulin
Yeah.
numbers,
Mm-hmm.
but now it's almost playing catch up. And so it can't keep up with me to keep me lower.
That all makes sense. And
But
that,
it's
yeah.
wild.
And it goes right back to, yeah, the original description that, that I quoted, that came from their site that does really talk about how it's system. So I'm going to share something that I've done just recently, about three
Yes.
weeks ago. I decided, because I'm such a Traceba basal insulin lover and how much I missed it, I was like, what if I just helped the system out a little bit and did my own basal dose in the morning? And just to tell you too, when I was MDI, my Traceba dose was 10 units. I did that every morning.
Okay.
And so I decided, it was a Sunday morning too. I remember it was a Sunday morning. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go for it. And I'm real lucky to have it on hand. My husband's still using the same insulin pens and all that. So we have it available, which is really cool. I dosed 5 units that same morning. I obviously wasn't going to do my full 10. I was like, let's just see what happens, you know. The first day, I did notice a difference because I think initially it probably just confused the pod and the system. But, I did it because I thought it was just going to give it a little boost. It was going to kind of fill in the gaps that I felt especially my overnights were missing. And then that whole week, I just kept doing it. I actually went down to 4 units because I felt like it was just too much. Just in general, my averages were getting a little too low on some occasions. So again, we got a system that's giving it to us automatically when we're working with it, the OmniPod. And then I have this other insulin floating around in my system that OmniPod doesn't know anything about.
Right.
But it really does. But that kind of points to what you were just talking about. When you went into the manual mode and it suddenly said, well, okay, everything's not what it was 2 weeks ago. So I think what it did was it really put a wrench in it. It wasn't helping. And that was my goal. I wanted it to just fill it in and say, okay, problem solved. I was willing to take that experiment and just to see, but it didn't. And I think just overall, it kind of messed up that algorithm of what Omnipod has been building to do since I've been wearing it. So I stopped it. So 6-7 days, I just said, no, this just doesn't. And you get that feeling. It's like, this just isn't feeling right. It doesn't, I'm feeling like it's kind of contradicting what the pump is trying to do for me. So I think just the old saying, there's too many cooks in the kitchen. Sometimes you got to simplify things, even though you're trying to see if you can kind of add your own little idea in there. I've heard of other people doing it. That's what kind of gave me the idea. I did a little bit of research about it, and yeah. So no, I'm right back to where I was, and I just tightened up my settings. Vios was working beautifully.
Yeah. Okay.
So far, so good. Yeah.
I'm interested in the Fiasp. I may have to explore that. Like I said, I've got that vial, but I haven't tried it. But maybe on my next pump, I'll give it a whirl. I mean, if it doesn't work, I just throw the pod away and go back to something else.
I know.
But in the same vein of what you were saying about using, an external injection, coupling with it. I mean, again, right before we got on our recording today, I had a pump failure and my blood sugars were really high, and I knew I wasn't getting some of that insulin, so I gave a manual injection, but I didn't give a manual injection to cover the full amount I had given through the pod because I don't know how much I really received, and the pod doesn't know that I gave that injection. So it's also working in the background to try to bring me back down. Right. So I think you're right. I think it throws a wrench in it. You really got to be careful with that information. And back to what I was saying too about being in manual mode for so long, the algorithm kind of breaking or taking a pause and not being able to readapt with the manual mode information. If my pump's general algorithm is based on, okay, Amanda needs 35 units of insulin a day on average, and I'm running higher, unless I'm feeding that algorithm with more insulin, it's not going to pick up that I now need more insulin every day. So it's not going to be able to keep up with me. And that's what's been happening. So I've decided to scrap the manual mode overnight option. If Omnipod kicks me into manual mode, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm asleep.
Sure.
But that's definitely different. We're talking about maybe an hour or two in manual mode versus 8 hours or 10 hours with my strategy to try to prevent the overnight low. So I think sometimes we have to ask ourselves, are we optimizing our pump? Or are we micromanaging our pump?
That's a good point.
And which way where do we want to go from there? So
And just,
It's
yeah, and asking ourselves really what, what's the end goal?
right,
Yeah, what's the
exactly.
expectations? How much time and energy and really worry, I guess is not really the word, but just energy that we're putting into this, and what are we expecting to come back? Will we ever be satisfied?
Right.
You
And
know?
I definitely felt like I felt discouraged about the thought of having to go to a different pump because I've
Mm,
worked so hard the last year and a half to really dial in and understand Omnipod, especially since, again, it's algorithm based. So the pump therapy is different than other traditional pump therapy. But I really appreciated what my coach said to me and what some other people, chatting with on the internet, and even things, Melissa, that you're sharing just about mindset, right? And how we approach things.
yeah,
We're building that foundation. And I know this too. I say this to my own clients, like, especially in fitness, like we're building a foundation. So
yeah.
there's a difference between a setback and a step back.
Mm,
And where our foundation still exists for us. So all the knowledge, the understanding, um, again, the foundation I've set for myself can carry into the next
mm-hmm.
type of pump therapy I want to try.
That's right.
So I just got to lean into that and remember that. But I'm definitely at a pivotal point where I want Omnipod to work for me so badly, but
Mm-hmm.
getting sleep, and Melissa, you know this. I mean, you talk about
Just
this
leave it.
in our coaching together.
Yeah,
Sleeping is so
yeah.
important.
Talk
And
about foundation.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that disrupted sleep from
Yeah.
overnight lows,
Mm-hmm.
it's not cutting it.
Right.
I don't like
Right.
it.
Right.
So,
Right, right. So the jury's still, so this is this is something that you're going through as we're speaking. So this is
correct.
current. So these are things that you're working through presently.
Yes.
And so if you were to give some advice to somebody that was considering the Omnipod 5, or really any pump system, again, there's no system, no perfect system. It's really just trying to, I always like kind of like your list of, okay, this is what I have to have. This is what's important to me. And seeing if you could take the time and maybe talk to trainers that know the system's pros and cons, and seeing, what would be the best fit for you. I think that's the best advice. I think most pump trainers would tell you that, or endos would tell you that, is really understanding you and what you need, and realistic expectations from what the pump can deliver for you. So, yeah,
That's such a
yeah,
big phrase you just said.
yeah.
Realistic expectations about what the pump can give you. And that ties into what I said earlier about it's our responsibility still
Mm-hmm.
to be the driver. I think there's a lot of chatter sometimes and frustration. Why can't the pump do this? And I've said it myself. You've said it yourself. Why can't the
Mm-hmm.
pump do this? And
Yeah.
the it's just a piece of technology, and it's a really
Mm-hmm.
powerful piece of technology, but it's not in charge. We're in charge, and
Mm-hmm.
we have to have, I love what you said, a realistic expectation about how we can optimize that technology. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where our key role comes in. How do
Yeah.
we understand and optimize that technology? And then we make a decision. So I think I don't hate the Omnipod. Again, this is my biggest complaint. So if someone out there's listening, hello Omnipod or any other T1D out there, I
Yeah.
mean, I would love to hear if you have a solution, but I will say, and I don't relish saying this, but both my coach and my endo have told me they've never worked with another patient or client that has this overnight low problem
Mm.
except me, which makes it challenging that I'm so special. No, I'm not really, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm
Yeah.
so unique. I feel like
It
the
seems so
problem child. I
unique.
actually don't feel special. I feel like a problem child.
Hmm.
Um, because there's nobody else to compare it to, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing is I really appreciate everybody on my team that's helping me kind of test the waters and all these different strategies we can try, and then
Yeah.
encourage me to say, let's try something else. You're working too hard.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to work this
I
hard.
get it,
So,
and companies like Omnipod and Medtronics, all the other pump companies, this information gets valuable to them, and I know they're paying attention.
sure.
They're listening, they're hearing our feedback, they're doing the best they can. But when I think about somebody like yourself, who is very in tune with her data and her practices and your habits, if they could, just as my suggestion, maybe if they took you aside and maybe really got some hands-on and real life feedback and real life examples of what's happening. And like you said, you may be unique compared to most, but are you?
Right. I can't be the only one.
I mean, you can't be the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, a big topic we talk about on here is hormones. So that's such a big interrupter of all these settings. And um, so, you know, I wonder, because I'm in menopause now, I think in perimenopause, because I know that's kind of your stage right now, if maybe that's part of it as well. There's so many different pieces to the puzzle. So you wonder, okay, so what's another question? What's the best pump for somebody with hormonal changes? Well, it depends on what age, right? Because technically we're always in hormonal changes. I mean, it starts from the, you know, puberty and on. But yeah, it's so dicey, you know, it's just, you know, how do you kind of apply it to every situation and hour of the day? I don't know that we can, or I don't know that these companies can necessarily do that and do it with,
Sure.
you know, right?
There's
Yeah.
that day, you know, anywhere between 2 to 4 days, you know, right before my cycle starts, where I just have these raging hormones, and I can see it in my graph. It's typically
Yeah.
overnight, and that's just a night, you know, going into bedtime, and often overnight, where insulin is like water. And I just go to sleep because I know there's nothing I can do with it. And I go back and look at my data, and I can see every single month when that major spike happens, and then look against my cycle tracker and go,
Sure.
that's what that was.
Right,
We're
right.
getting ready to go. I don't expect a pump to be able to specifically hone in that that's what's happening and microdose me so aggressively. So I'm not looking for that, and I don't think anybody should. But just the
Yeah.
day to day or overnight to overnight,
Yeah, I totally agree.
that's the part where we've got to find something that can hold us steady more than 33% of the time. And again,
Right.
this is a me problem, but OmniPod,
Right.
if you're listening, call me, give me a call. I would love to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's a win-win, you know, for them to learn more about their systems and from those of us that are wearing them for sure. Well,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your story and your input and what you're currently going through. And I know listeners are going to be interested in learning more. And hopefully we didn't confuse them any. I don't know. It's one of those things. Maybe we said too much. Maybe we shared too many different variables. But you know, I think it's real life and it's conversation, and I think it's great that we can just kind of relay. And you know, we just trust us. It's not just you. No matter what your pump is or your insulin injection system is. Yeah, we all face these ups and downs and these curveballs, and it's just part of life at T1D. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right. I know we threw a lot of information out today,
No.
but I think it's good because if someone listening to your podcast heard just one bullet point of something we said and it makes them feel heard or seen or relatable, or they have an idea to share, I think that's what's worth it. So
Yeah.
I would rather just have full transparency. I never have a problem being vulnerable on the internet when it comes to type 1 diabetes, because I just want to learn and share as well. And I know you do too, Melissa. And I think that's such an amazing quality. So thank you for providing a space for us to talk about this.
Absolutely. And just like you say, it stirs other thoughts or
Yes.
ideas. So whether or not it's directly related, you know, the things that we shared today, chances are there's some sort of an offset that's going to lead people to talk about this. It's real important. It's real important to talk about this. Really good stuff. Well, share with our listeners how they can find you.
Absolutely. So I'm on Instagram at Bolus and Biceps. And you will find me on Instagram talking about nutrition, fitness, and then right now, weekly, I am sharing a post called A Week with Me and T1D, where I'm actually sharing pictures of my clarity reports and actively talking about the data analysis and changes. So if you listen to this episode and you want to hear how things turn out with me and OmniPod and this overnight debacle, then follow me.
Absolutely.
I'm out there sharing and
Love
you know,
it.
opening it up for conversations to continue in the comments.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Real life. And this is what we do here. So I love it. So, well, thanks, Amanda. And we'll invite you back for another show, I'm sure.
Yes.
So there's always, I know when we were talking about doing this episode, we're like, gosh, what can we talk about? There's such a list. And this was this one seemed to just kind of pop up easily, you know, because it's so current with us.
Right.
So yeah. Because guess what? We got to take insulin every day, so it's pretty current, isn't it?
Pretty current.
Pretty current. Can't get any more current than that.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, I love talking to you, so I'm happy to chat with you anytime about anything on your mind.
Oh, I appreciate you. Well, be sure to share this show, and we'll be back in here again next week. And bye for now.